I am back again, and here we are. We are going to continue with our second lesson on the book of Ruth. And as I mentioned before, there was a famine in the land of Israel. This resulted because of the terrible situation that the people of Israel were in at the time, when this famine brought upon the land and this trouble in the land. These things are brought about as a result of our deeds. And unfortunately, they were worshipping idols, and there was difficulty, and people were judging the judges, as we mentioned, and therefore God brought about this famine. And the question is, what do you do in a situation of famine? Well, it says there was a man, he left Beit Lechem, the place of Beit Lechem, the city of Beit Lechem, in Judah, Lagor b'Snei Moav, and I mentioned in the last lesson, of course, Beit Lechem we know refers to the place in the tribal portion of Judah where Rachel was buried, in that city. And to go to Moab, Moab again goes back to way back in the book of Genesis, of the story of Lot, and that's how that nation came about. And we mentioned that in our previous lesson as well. Uvishto Shnei Banav, Elimelech left together with his wife and his two sons. V'shem Ish Elimelech, v'shem Ishto Naomi. He was called Elimelech. His wife was called Naomi. V'shem Shnei Banav Machlon v'Chilyon. His two sons' names were Machlon v'Chilyon. Ephratim, they were from Ephrat. Ephrat is another name of Beit Lechem. In Beit Lechem, Yehuda, Yavos, Snei Moav, Yusham. They came to Snei Moav, and they were there. Now, what does that all mean? First of all, we have to ask ourselves, who's this Elimelech, and why does it open up the book of Ruth of telling us how someone left Israel? You know, living in Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. This is where we belong. This is where we have to stay. This is where we have to set up our homes and our families. Not in America or not anywhere else in the world. The place of the Jewish nation is the state of Israel, the country of Israel, to be here. And what happens in times of distress and trouble? Well, we have to stick it out. We have to try to make the best of the situation, even in difficult times. And the question is, how could Elimelech pick up his wife and children and leave Israel in a time of struggle, a time of difficulty? So the first question is, who is this Elimelech person? And on the spot, Rashi, as our great commentator brings down, Ashir Gadol Haya Ufarnas Hador. He was a very, very wealthy man, and he was the Farnas, means he was the leader of the generation. Again, he was like if you want to look at a political figure, he was like a political figure, a very wealthy man, and a judge was more of a spiritual leader, right? Boaz was a spiritual leader at the time, as you mentioned. But there was also a political leader who was involved in, of course, helping out the house of Israel monetarily and dealing with all difficulties. He was one of those political leaders. He left Israel because he was too, putting it mildly, cheap. Tzarut ayin means he had narrow vision. Why? Because poor people would come to Elimelech for help, and instead of helping these poor people the way he should have done, he decided that he's going to run away with his money and hide somewhere in the land of Moab, a very quiet place at that time that he could have lived in quietly with his family, with all his gold and silver, and not feel bad about the poor people that need help in his area. And the question is, that's pretty terrible. Yes, it is. A person like Elimelech, his name is so powerful, Elimelech, right? And there's a king in there. He could have been a leader. He has a powerful position he was a leader of Israel, a great person. He had the ability of helping people in times of famine. Instead, he decided to turn his back on his people and leave. I remember a couple of years ago, we'll go back on how many years ago, it wasn't too many years ago, couldn't have been, during the Lebanese war in Israel. It was very, very painful. I forgot what it was. I met a couple of girls, and at the airport, I was one of my trips I took to the States, and they were crying to me at the airport. I was saying, "Why are you crying for?" They're saying, my parents don't want me to be in Israel now because of the war. They're afraid. They want me to go back to America. They were crying with tears. They were in a program in Israel, and they were afraid. Who knows what's going to be in Israel? So right away, calling the children back. instead of staying here, and the presence of every Jew in the land brings blessing and salvation to the people, so the opposite. They're pulling their children back to America, trying to hide, trying to save their children because they're afraid what's maybe happened to them. And here they are just for a few months in Israel in the yeshiva program, and here people living here day and night, risking their lives for the people of Israel, and they're bringing them back. But first, number one, my answer was to these girls. I mean, what can they do right now? The parents are bringing them back. But I told them one day, bless you, I hope to make Aliyah to move to Israel. But unfortunately, this is a very, very difficult situation that is created through an exile situation, where people are still living in exile, and Jews, they forget that their devotion, their loyalty must be 100% to the land more than anything else. And their existence outside of Israel is only temporary, and eventually this is going to be the haven for every Jew. So we got to educate our children that way, and continue to educate our people that way, because that's really, we can never turn our back on the land of Israel in times of distress. That's exactly what this guy Elimelech does. He takes his family away from the land when they could have been here to strengthen the land and to help those who needed help at that time. And of course, we see the results of his deed. Because right away it says, "Vayamot Elimelech ish Nomi." It says Elimelech died, which means if he would have stayed in Israel he thought he was going to be saving his life and worrying about his personal self, but instead, it didn't work that way. He died. He left Israel and he died, because when you leave the Holy Land, you're disconnecting yourself from the line of life. Vatisha. Oh, little sneeze. Wow, I sneeze on that. Leaving the land is just disconnecting from the umbilical cord of the Holy Land. Vatisher hi ushnei banea. And Naomi, the wife of Elimelech, was left alone with her two sons. Vayisulem nashim moaviyot. This is what happens when Bridget loves burning. As a matter of fact, they end up marrying and mixing in with the population, and they married Moabite women. And that's, of course, assimilation, and we see it all over the world, unfortunately. And Jewish people, the rate of assimilation in the world is frightening. I mean, for Jews really outside of Israel is really barely assimilation in the country, in the land of Israel itself, but outside of Israel is a tremendous, tremendous plague of assimilation. We know that in certain countries it's 50% and above. In America, it's very hard at assimilation. And that's what happens when you're outside the land, because people forget the boundaries of where they can step and where they're not allowed to step, and what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. Unfortunately, the Jewish people were people, this is really a good thing, of course, that we were merciful people of love and kindness, and we always want to help others and do for others. That's the nation of Israel. That's the way we should be behaving. On the other hand, there's a problem with that, because then sometimes you just love so much others that you can even forget the boundaries and completely forget that you're Jewish and say, okay, I'm universal and I could intermarry and I can really do with everyone else, be like anyone else and be part of that. What's the difference between a non-Jew and a Jew? Why can't I marry a non-Jew? What's wrong with that? They're wonderful people, which is true. There are a lot of amazing people out there. They're not Jewish, right? And there are a lot of people that are rotten from the core that are Jewish. So, what's going on over here, right? I'm sorry now, I'm getting a little, I'm treading on a difficult subject here. But the point is that we have to remember the Jewish people, Hashem created every person's world as a purpose. Created the nation of Israel with a purpose. And as a nation that has to remain its integrity and identity. And in order for us to achieve our purpose, we have to remain now a special purpose. And if we forget who we are and intermingle with others, we will lose our identity. And then we'll no longer be able to maintain our identity as Jews once we become obviously Gentile mingling, because our children will no longer be Jewish anymore, will be gone, will disappear. And we have to focus on what we were as a nation of Israel born for. And of course, as I mentioned many times, every nation has its own purpose, and nations have to try to maintain their identity and their integrity to maintain that purpose. Of course, there are always people that want to become part of the house of Israel, and that's 100% legitimate. And we allow for that in Judaism, although we try to push people off and persuade them not to convert, because in Israel, being a Jew and receiving the obligations of being Jewish and Torah, and it's a huge yoke, but people who have this adamant will and desire to be Jewish, we can't say no anymore to them. We have to allow them to be part of the nation. And these souls that have this desire, somewhere down the line, they would put the lost tribes, or down the line they were definitely Jewish, or sparks would have remained within them, and they wanted to return, these sparks will return to the nation of Israel, those who have desire to be Jewish. But there are many non-Jews in the world, Gentiles, wonderful people, that don't have these desires. We don't want them to be Jewish, but we want them to remain their identity as the nations, and of course, but one thing that we do as Jewish people require, even as from the non-Jew, is that they follow the 7 Noahide laws. We spoke about this before, and that's just the beginning of those who want it, because the different levels of spirituality, where non-Jew must, of course, take upon himself, knows that that's the minimum requirement. But then, of course, if he has more spiritual desires, the sky's the limit. He can continue growing and adopt more commandments upon himself, as the Rambam states. And those are called, we call them Bnei Noach, but Bnei Noach again is just a term meaning you are not Jewish, you are a righteous Gentile following the laws of Hashem for a Gentile, but Hashem is the God of everybody in the universe, and therefore doesn't forget about anybody. That's number one. But it's very important, even if someone is a Ben Noach and a very, very righteous Gentile, it still doesn't allow a Jew to marry that person until they are 100% Jewish. That's the way that's the basic laws in Judaism. And when the sons went out and they married Moabite women, the answer was, there's no doubt that they were very special women if they married them, if they're Elimelech, and the mother allowed them to do. I assume they had influence on their children, and they allowed them to do. And we see later on what kind of special woman Ruth was, of course. But we can't justify what was done. What came out of it was amazing at the end for Ruth. But we can't, of course, justify it. But this is what happened, and things happen. And we know today things happen like this all the time. And with that introduction, we shall continue. Vayisulam nashim Moaviyot, and they married the Moabite women. Shem echad Orpah, one of the name was Orpah, V'shem hashanit Ruth, and the other one was Ruth. Vayishvu sham k'esef shanim, they lived there with their new families in the land of Moab for 10 years. Vayamutu gam shnehem. And what happened? The two boys also died. And again, they passed away because they settled in the foreign land. They could have come back. Their intentions originally were to leave, as the verse says. They went to go to the Moab, but it says afterwards Vayushav, and they were there, which means they settled in too long. They got too comfortable in the exile. So Machlon and Chilion passed away. They died there. And Naomi was left alone with her two daughter-in-laws now, the Moabite ladies, and she was left alone with them. And she got up together with her daughters-in-law. Vatashov misnei Moab, and they decided to leave Sdei Moab. Why? Ki shama b'Sdei Moab, ki pakad Adonai et amo letet lahem lachem, because they heard that God decided to return and bring bread back to His people. So it's very interesting. They originally left from the city of Beit Lechem. Beit Lechem means in Hebrew, as mentioned before, the house of bread, Lechem. And they're returning now again to Beit Lechem, the city of Beit Lechem. Why? Because there is now bread again in the city. And God remembered His people. Of course, we see here the amazing quality of Naomi, that she always had her intentions to return to the land of Israel, and now that she was independent, well, her sons weren't here, and maybe they were forcing her to stay, who knows what, but of course the great news that took place, she decided to return to the land of Israel. Vatetzei min hamakom, and they left that place, asher ita shama, ushtei chalotei ima, and the two daughter-in-laws was with her, so they left. It's interesting that the verse 7 over here, in chapter 1 of Ruth, says that they left the place where they were. Why does it go? But it just says before, she heard that God remembered her people, and they decided to come and return to the land of Israel. It says she already got up and they wanted to go back. But it's a very important lesson over here as well. We see that there's one thing is called thoughts, and the other one is called actions. A lot of people have great thoughts in this world. The most important thing is to apply them in action.